All right. Well, this is, I guess, everyone's chance to have at it with the speakers of the day. I think you've heard a variety of topics that range from pricing, trends, different forms of license deployment, different stages of license implementation. So, if you guys have questions, I know some of you have kind of passed some on to me anonymously. But before I get to those, you guys have questions? Any questions from the audience?
This is for Joshua. By the way, that was an excellent presentation, very, very thought-provoking. I'm going to try to convince my management to give you some money. So, one of your takeaways from your software pricing survey, I wrote it down as anchor renewal discussions with a price increase. Our world is the half of our world that's not in the cloud anyway. The on-premise world is classical perpetual licenses, et cetera. So, our renewal conversation is mostly around support. So I'm curious, what maybe some of the best practices or most common ways of kind of like having that conversation. And I get it if that means we have to kind of like continually improve support or something. But I'm kind of curious what tactics or what specific things you see customers use a lot for that conversation as it relates to support.
Sure.
So is that clear?
Is this on? Yeah. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. How effectively do you anchor those negotiations so that you can achieve kind of an increase in recurring revenue, not just give them another whack at the piñata? So it starts with the original sale and having language in the contract that specifies renewal conditions. And the industry standard, I would say, most companies will use either CPI or something like a 3 to 5% cap. That's what I have seen work best. That's the biggest element, definitely. It's hard to bring it back at the end. Now, if you have a long organizational history where you haven't had those in contracts, then I would start to think about whether there are other things you can change with the maintenance structure itself. So kind of like the example I showed where you're creating a new maintenance tier with some extra level of service that you can go back to the embedded base with and still stay VSOE compliant. Or another shift that I didn't touch on but have helped companies with is if your maintenance historically has been based on % of net price paid, the ability to transition to maintenance as a % of list price gives you another opportunity in a stable business to recast that whole maintenance discussion. So it could be I've worked with companies that find themselves, they've chugged along at 14 or 15% of net maintenance, but that's kind of below industry standard of 18 to 22% or so. But it's impossible to rehave those discussions you had 5-10 years ago when you sold the original licenses. The only way to really revisit that is to change your whole price book and reorient on maintenance as a % of list and kind of make a bold statement about what the true value of your products is and that maintenance is tied to that. But interested what others have to say.
Can I? I spend a lot of my time talking with customers that are in maintenance negotiations with vendors, and the vendors are all doing those things, and the customers are pissed. It's the only way I can describe it. I mean, I think the 3 to 5% is reasonable. There's some sort of element, and most software providers that I know have within their maintenance contracts anyway that they can charge a cost of living adjustment annually. Most of them don't do that. There are a few that do every year. I think that that's reasonable. I think it will be very difficult. I mean, the cat is already out of the bag with maintenance price based on net versus list, and to try to turn that back around again, unless it's been 10 years and people don't remember. There's nobody at the company who would negotiate at that initial thing is there anymore. I think that would be a really difficult conversation to have. Not that you couldn't have that conversation, but I just feel like I think there definitely are companies, I mean, take SAP as an example, who came up with their new maintenance tier, and there's definitely some lessons learned there about what maybe you could do wrong in that situation that would be worth looking at. They ended up having to pull that back because they couldn't legally do what they had done in certain countries. And then once word got out that, hey, Germany and Austria don't have to do this, why should we have to do this in the US? So there's definitely some lessons learned and some strategies that can be applied, but putting on the hat of the customer, you always have to weigh the importance of having a good customer relationship versus the customer feeling like you've got them between a rock and a hard place, and you're going to use that opportunity to take advantage of them.
Just to add to that, I would also say that in different parts of our business, we've also segmented our direct new product sales to maintenance renewals and have different teams for that too. Because if you have a team that's gold solely on maintenance renewals and yields and the capacity of the renewal, because it's hard, the price change stuff is hard. There's no question about that. I think the first thing you want to make sure is you're maximizing your yield on the renewals, and you're also having the opportunity to introduce new things in that renewal cycle, because then it gives you the opportunity to open that conversation and that dialogue. But like, I'm all about hitting those things first, because it's hard to influence a major price increase in a maintenance contract. Those are tricky, and that 3 to 5% is kind of the max that you could pull off.
Especially if they're at the point where they feel like they don't need any new product. They don't. I mean, if you have an antivirus software, something where you constantly have to update it, that's one thing. But if they're kind of at end of life with that product anyway, and they're already probably, I mean, I do calls with a lot of people who are considering dropping maintenance and what are the risks associated with doing that. This product's 5 years old or 3 years old, and so it's, another thing to weigh as well is how much value are you putting into maintenance, and how much value does maintenance have for someone that's been on it for 5 years with the same product.
We're going to go back and forth here. Because and the other thing, too, though, is that the thing that I think companies are poor at as well is when there is a customer. I think, Bob, you brought up the example where an incumbent vendor would end of life something. Well, there's also an opportunity to go back to your customers and increase maintenance significantly for something you're end of lifing, and you can actually run a decent revenue stream off of products that are end of life basically, and that you're going to have a handful of customers on. And we have a couple of customers that are on very old technology of ours that can't replace, and I want to continue to maximize, because I got to cover my cost and make a margin on it when I have a handful of people on it. So that's another opportunity to look at too. Sorry.
Yeah, and just one more comment. We talked a lot about transition process for transitioning to SaaS today. This maintenance discussion we're having is equally as potentially painful with customers, and you need even if you're thinking about doing it, you need that transition plan in place. And most companies, what they've done is phase it in with new customers first, and then go back to the existing customer base and grandfather in companies as it makes sense. I mean, not apply a one-size-fits-all policy to how they're going to go into those renewal negotiations.
Thank you. You actually, related to that, you'd mentioned the time to transition being kind of the different phases, right? Reactive versus, adaptive, and the fastest, you said, is about 2 years. And is there a specific set of data that determines what path a company chooses? Is it internal factors, or how does a company go about deciding which of those paths they want to take towards a transition?
Okay. I guess I'll take first crack at that one too. I think it is internal factors, and I think that a public company, it would be very hard to do in 2 years, given the changes to income statement. But I think that's more of a private company timeline, or maybe a private equity timeline of we're going in, we're buying a company, we're overhauling it, and trying to spin it out again in 3 to 5 years. My personal thinking is it's more internally driven. But excited to hear what others have to say too.
Yeah, and I think somebody brought up earlier in the day, I agree with you, and also channel comes into play a lot. Realistically, so you're 100% direct sales company, all you've got to deal with is internal. Say you're 80% indirect, you've got to deal with your business transformation as well as your partner's business transformation, and that can take a very, very long time. It could mean all new partners.
Hold on, Mike. I think this works. I mean, any comments from this side panel? I mean, Aviva has had software that sits in customer sites for a long number of many years, right?
Just one comment. I think raising the price is always an opportunity to upsell, but you've always got to demonstrate the value to the customer. I mean, you can't go into a customer and just because it's the renewal of a contract, jack the price up, because there's the what's in it for me syndrome, and it's up to a software vendor to really be very, very clear about what the value is to the customer. Then you can have that conversation reasonably easily, but just to jack the price up because it's a renewal, it ain't gonna work.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry.
Sorry.
Aviva's not up for renewal anytime soon. Never mind the dam. Any other questions? Not related necessarily to this topic, but.
So let's suppose that a company acquires another company, and they have a very different type of product. And now you have an existing licensing and fulfillment model around your current products, and you've got this completely new and different. And I've heard a lot of people say you can't have two different models in the same company, but in this case, maybe it makes sense.
So I'll speak on, I've been there. Yeah, previous companies I've worked for. We've done a lot of that, and it's the reality is that if you think about it's one thing you're buying a new company with new product that has 10 customers. If you buy a company that has product that has thousands of customers, right? That's when you have to really evaluate that. Ideally, you want to get on a common licensing platform. Like everyone will tell you that. That's definitely people's goals and dreams. But those bigger companies, it's very hard when you're picking up. In some examples, I was involved with companies that had 1,000 customers, and they're very different licensing models, and you kind of have to let that run out. You have to look at when is the opportunity to be able to merge that. But that is why, if you look, you will not see the biggest 5 software companies be very consistent on their licensing models because of that very reason. So what they tend to do is turn off the licensing model, which you'll find that most of the times that's what will happen, and experience again. But they want to solve the problem. They want to find better ways of solving that. But it's a challenge that isn't that easy. And I think part of it is that the different products had different strategies and different expectations on what they were trying to get. In my presentation earlier, whether it's about audit, whether it's about enforcement, whether it's just about insight for product management. So they all had different reasons for implementation that when you roll that all together within the bigger picture, it's inconsistent. So you'll find that the bigger vendors will go to the lowest common denominator or feature set to get enforcement number one, I would say. Does that answer your question, Warren?
Well, it does to some extent. In this case, the acquisition is really selling into a virtualized environment. Very different from, say, the traditional hardware-based environment.
Yeah.
And so the whole process has got to be very different. And I'm not sure that it would totally make sense to say, oh, we're just going to move everything into one platform.
Yeah, there's definitely examples where you wouldn't want to merge it. Just let it run. But you can't, if you do that 5 times, you have a problem, right? 2 times, okay. Did anyone else? Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I want to be clear on, and I think you sort of helped me to answer the question or articulate it, not being able to have it both ways. It doesn't mean that you can't have a few different technologies, or it doesn't mean that you make an acquisition and this product for this market really needs to be licensed this way. I think it gets to the volume of what you're doing. And as an example, large actually a hardware-oriented company acquires a cloud firm, keeps that very, very isolated from a billing perspective, because that's not the way that they traditionally do their business. As this cloud firm starts to grow, they find that they really would like their channel to sell it, but their channel doesn't know how to sell cloud services. So in order to make that cloud product work, they turn it into a hardware SKU. And now their channel can start to sell it. It seems completely counterintuitive. They took a step backward to take a step forward, in their words. But I guess what it comes around to is it's impossible for them to be a 100% cloud company. They can have that, but they're structured to move boxes. And so that's what they have to continue to do for 80% of their business. And so it would be difficult for them to say, I'm just going to do 50% here and 50% here. There is going to be some split. That's just the nature. It's not clean in any company. But at some point in time, you have to decide, what are you? You know, what do I do? And that's how my channel, corporate culture, you know, everything lines up behind it.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, what people I work for have strived for is, as you said, a common pricing philosophy across the products and acquisitions that they acquire. And in that same hardware versus cloud problem in a roll-up situation, you know, it wasn't, their decision wasn't to be pure hardware or pure cloud player, but they had a philosophy of, we're just going to achieve a small margin on our hardware and try to have everything else be subscription based. And those subscription models could be user based or usage based. But when they acquired a pure cloud company, they fitted in that model. When they acquired a hardware company, they fitted in that model. And it was more about having a common philosophy they could sell across. Yeah.
Does that answer more?
Yeah, thanks very much.
So just going back to the comments that you were making about flexibility and what kind of license models can we bring in front of customers, one of the traditional sources of revenue for software companies has been enterprise licensing. And in the new world of cloud and software as a service or usage-based models, what are your thoughts on enterprise licensing? Because if you talk to the salespeople, they get pretty excited about enterprise licensing because that allows them to sell premier software at deep discounts at volume to, you know, large enterprises. And large enterprises love enterprise licensing because that allows for better discounting, better terms, what have you. What are your thoughts on how these models are going to impact enterprise licensing?
I'll just I think seems like we probably all have comments on this. I do see enterprise licensing in the cloud in certain situations. Look, the same people who are selling cloud came from these big on-premise software companies. And a lot of the same companies that are buying cloud, Coca-Cola, Virgin, I mean, they are used to buying enterprise deals. And that's, from a procurement perspective, what they want in many cases. And so I have started to see, you don't see them nearly as often as you'd see in the on-premise world, but enterprise license agreements for subscription and cloud services. Does that meet the buying criteria of everyone that's buying a cloud service? Probably not, especially when you start to talk about smaller increments, usage-based pricing. But there certainly are some situations where, you know, particularly larger enterprise customers who are used to buying in ELAs are going to be looking for those same types of structures with cloud services. Either of you?
Yeah, that's a real tough question because so I'm a buyer of software, right? So when you think about my company, we're a big Salesforce.com, we're an Oracle shop, Microsoft shop, and but going back to days of my other companies that I've been at, it's very hard, actually, the ELA type agreements, because they're not line item oriented, and that's a big challenge. So like when you get a customer who wants to renew, this is inevitable will happen, is that if you have a multi-product company, you have an ELA with the customer, the renewal period comes up, they're getting tight on IT budgets, they want to strike off a line, and the answer is, yeah, sure, go ahead, but it's one price. It doesn't change the price because it's not line item oriented. And I think there's got to be new models for that in the future, because I know big Salesforce.com customer, I speak a lot on their behalf too. I've signed big deals. I was the CIO at the time we bought Salesforce at CA, and this was now going on 6 years ago. But I don't like getting nickel and dimed either. I don't like if I want that, if I want chat, or if I want the work, or I want the service component or the marketing component. So there's that balance is hard, but I still think it's got to be ultimately line item pricing with a value associated with it, that you have an ability to tweeze out the value you're getting, and if you want to change or redirect your spend, that you really want to be able to do that. So. It's a very difficult thing in this new world, because it's not. Most people do not want to do ELAs because it's too confusing and too hard to book in your finances. So,
yeah, just building on that point. I mean, some of the activity I've seen has been moving away from traditional ELA. Eat all you can, and for many users, as you want, complete lists to more what you're saying. The self-directed, more of a spend commitment against a variety of menu options, and then instead of making a commitment exactly what functionality and user counts they're going to need over the next 3 to 5 years, they're committing to a certain spend, and then as their needs evolve, they can pull down based on a custom price list, essentially, what they need. It provides a little more flexibility, preserves the value, and sales still gets what they want, which is a large upfront commitment to book as their commission.
You miss out on the recurring revenue stream that subscriptions give you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for Viva, for example, have you guys ever entertained ELA type of lists, or has it always sort of been subscription based?
It's always subscription based, but we obviously have, if you like, bundled deals that we will offer to people. But one thing I would say is that I think it's important to distinguish between licensing and pricing. I mean, how you license your products is fine. I mean, you can license them however you like, and you can give them away for free if you want. And I think in many companies the licensing and pricing are kind of tied together too closely. And again, the risk of sounding boring, it comes back to being able to demonstrate the value to the customer when you're talking about pricing, totally independent of licensing, in my view.
Yeah, I can chime in as well. In my experience, a business model, a license model usually has, let's call it 3 different levers, right? Whether it's server, customer, and time, let's say, or there's some variable on usage, and then there's always this time variable, which is the subscription term, right, as it were. And with a lot of the unlimited type deals, right, what ends up happening is that you always need to fence in one of those variables, right? It's usually time, right, to make it unlimited term, right? Get all this stuff for a set amount of time, right? So those are the models that I see both for on-premise software as well as my experience in SaaS as well.
Questions?
Hi. Earlier, Al, you asked a question to Alvin about passing usage information from the end user's company back to the vendor and what inherent problems that could pose. So 2 things. I wanted to answer the question and then turn the question around and ask Bob a question about the same thing. So my experience in doing that, in being able to, talking to end customers about transferring usage information there's really 3 components of it. 1, tell your customers that you're going to be transferring data, right? Don't try to hide it or you're screwed. to be able to tell them what information you're transferring. And then thirdly, and I think it's a big piece, use it to your advantage. Turn it around and be able to show your customer what their usage is, right? So your customer's much more apt to give you that data if there's something in it for them. So be prepared, again, to be able to show them that data. There's value in that data, right? So that's my experience in that. So then my question to Bob, you folks have been in the usage-based pricing business in licensing business for quite some time. So is that your experience? Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, I think if you can be transparent with the customer and let him know exactly what you're using the information for, because the initial threat is that you're asking for this information for some foul deed that's going to come along at some point, and it's not usually that at all. I mean, the usage information clearly does help the software vendor because it enables him to sort of, if you like, tweak and refine how he deals with his customers. But usually there is benefit to the customer as well, as you say, because they will get a much better picture of what they're actually using. It can work against the software vendor because they could decide they don't need to pay all this for these products. So, but I think that being transparent is the name of the game.
Any more questions? It's hard for me to see. There we go. We're going here.
Lights are really
Yeah, they're it's a little blinding.
Yeah.
Thank you. I had some hosted software, and when we originally purchased it, we started with concurrent seat license, and it became very popular. We managed a bunch of our assets with it, and because it became more popular, that concurrent seat model didn't really work out very well, because now we had a lot of people who want to use it, but it was cost prohibitive. So we had switched over at time of contract renewal into a model that made it more advantageous for us to get a lot more people using it, but it also, made the product more valuable to the vendor, because product marketing was getting information from it, engineering was developing on it, and then service was still connecting into the assets. So it's just I think if it's too expensive in a model where people won't use it as much, then that can be detrimental too. You don't get the growth with the product.
So is that directed more at me?
Yeah.
It seems like it. Yeah. Are you referring to us as the provider, or just in general?
No.
Okay. I'm just making sure. Like, did we do something bad? No. Well, yeah, there's like the largest SaaS company in the world, right? You kind of wrestle with named versus concurrent users, and that was a big challenge. When I was at BMC, one thing I was responsible there for was Remedy Force. So that was their competitive product to ServiceNow. So it's help desk as a service on the Force.com platform. It was the biggest complaint I had to deal with customers, right, is that Salesforce doesn't provide concurrent license model. That'd be named users, right? And so that's a really lousy model for help desk, because sometimes it's any of us opening a help desk ticket. And so they kind of help change that model a little bit to make it more conducive, but it was very expensive to get a named license, and they were really pushing that model. So I think that the customer base, the consumer now, is driving this change and hard, and that's where I think we're seeing that opportunity, so that people that do offer that and make it competitive. Because the company I was at, Numara, we had a cloud product, and we were named, unnamed, we were on-prem. We were totally blew the theory for Amy. It was choice. You can go on in premise and cloud, and I agreed with a lot of things you said, because it was a nightmare convincing the sales team, what do they sell? Right? Like, that's the hardest part. Like, I really wanted to jump out of my seat when Amy was presenting, but I didn't. The hardest part is to make that decision, is because you have a salesperson, and no disrespect to my colleagues in sales that work for me here in the room, but it's somewhat behavior driven, is based on how you want to drive compensation too, right? So if you're going to gear towards wanting to get SaaS revenue and subscription revenue and sell more of the service, you've got to make it lucrative to do that, right? And that was our big competitive edge against both BMC and ServiceNow, is we didn't care if you were named or unnamed. So sometimes choice works, but the management team has to be very cognizant of decisions you make that because it's going to impact your revenue and it's going to impact your customer experience. So you can make those choices, but you got to put all the systems in place, including a compensation model for sales, to ensure that you're going to get that result. Does that help a bit? Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else want to comment? Because I was getting singled out on that one. Okay.
Any more from the audience?
Yeah, the bar's opening. That's what everyone's getting.
Yeah, I think you guys kind of covered most of the questions here. I mean, there was one question that I was submitted for Aviva, which was around how you work in, because you guys do have a pretty set license model, and you've been doing licensing for a number of years. So how have you managed acquisitions as you've done them over the years into the licensing fold? Is there a certain set of steps or a prescribed time by which you...
Well, it's pretty much on a case-by-case basis, but ultimately we try to get everybody onto the same licensing system. But you can't do that at day one. And as I was saying to somebody earlier, when you acquire a company, it's all about the people and the processes in addition to the technology. So you can't acquire a company and then suddenly say, right, from next week everything's going to be ported this way, and we're going to sell it this way, and we're going to support it this way, because it won't happen like that. So you've got to sort of have a proper migration plan. But yeah, the message is we want everything on one licensing system.
What if you're a software licensing company? What if you're a software licensing company and you buy a software licensing company, like we did? Those are the hard ones. Yeah. So yeah, when we bought Aladdin and SafeNet merged with Aladdin, I wasn't here obviously, but I think we've gotten through most of that now. But it was as I talk to customers, I get customers from both companies. So that's a higher level of complexity of that question.
Last call for questions before it's first call for the bar. Good. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank our panelists, everyone here, and I'll hand it over to Dave to sort of close us out.
Well, thank you, everyone. I want to definitely thank all our speakers that presented today. That really helps make the conference. You know, you come and you network, and that's the important aspects. But hearing from thought leaders in the industry, myself excluded, is really, I think, the benefit of getting together like this. A great turnout and great interaction with people. I know I keep on going to the halls. I have little side meetings with folks, and everyone's doing the same thing. And I appreciate that level of enthusiasm, because sometimes you go to these conferences, no questions, everyone's dead, they're walking out and all that. But at the end of the day, the room's still pretty full, which is a fantastic tribute to all of you. So those of your customers, I want to thank you. For those who are going to be customers, I want to thank you, because you will be soon. I want to thank our team, too, is that I know these things don't go off that smoothly unless you have a lot of people behind the scenes. And I'm very impressed, first one I've been to, and it's just been very well run, and I want to thank our team for that. But I would like you to, we're going to go to cocktails now, and there's a couple hours to spend some time having a drink and visit with people, and make sure you get your questions answered. I always challenge anyone at a conference is if you have questions on your mind, find the person, get them answered. I've met a lot of great people today and heard some really intriguing challenges and problems people have, and that's where I appreciate Bob's candor. I think when a couple things that he said is there was some of the questions were, do we meet all our timelines? This stuff's hard. It's not easy. We're not claiming it's out of the box simple. It's hard, you know, and our commitment, and I've heard this so many of you today, and I've heard it from many folks as I've traveled around, is that I think people see our commitment. SafeNet has always been very strong, our people, our technology, and when we say we're going to do something, we'll get it done for you. So I just want to thank everybody for your participation, and I look forward to having a drink shortly, like now. So thank you, everyone.